This is Jimmy's ship, and this is Jimmy's crew. They are members of a space freight company, Pony Express, and have unfortunately had an accident in space, causing them to become stranded. With limited supplies on board, Jimmy has to take charge as the captain and do whatever it takes to get them through this crisis. Whatever it takes. This is Jimmy's story. Quite literally. This is his version of events, his perspective throughout the entire event besides for a few moments. If you thought Nick Carraway was an unreliable narrator, oh boy, you're in for a shock. Mouthwashing is a non-linear storytelling puzzle game, or I guess a walking simulator with extra steps, since the puzzles for the most part are quite minimal and the focus is really on laying out the plot and developing the characters. Jimmy is the newly appointed captain, previously the co-pilot, replacing the previous captain Curly, now reduced to this unfortunate state. There's also Anya the nurse, Swansea the mechanic, and Daisuke, his intern. You play mostly from the perspective of Jimmy, though later on you do switch to Curly's POV from time to time as the story unfolds. I would split the story's timeline into 3 broad parts: before the accident, after the accident, and Judgment Day. The game jumps around these events and gradually builds the full picture of how the ship crashed, timeline of events, and a better understanding of the crew, of which we find out how horrible of a person Jimmy really is. But that's not really anything exciting. I think anyone can easily see that he's a narcissistic sociopath. He enjoys being in power, he doesn't really care much for other people's feelings, in fact he abuses other people quite blatantly without regard, and even as you play from his perspective and experience all the jump scares, you, the player, might have gotten scared, but we don't see any sign of that in Jimmy's character himself. The only bare sliver of anything good is when he puts Curly in the last working cryo chamber instead of himself at the end of the game, but even then he does so with an idea of some kind of heroism or accomplishment, as though everything worked out. Newsflash Jimmy, you killed 3 people then saved like half of one out of the goodness of your heart. Or whatever's in there. I wouldn't consider that a victory. The point is, Jimmy is irresponsible. Now, I know that doesn't sound harsh enough of a criticism, but let me explain. The central theme of Mouthwashing is responsibility, evident from the direct references made to it throughout the game. Perhaps more subtly, through the roles and the characters play as well. The nurse, the captain, the co-pilot, the mechanic, and the intern. Individually, they have specific tasks tailored to their roles, which are their responsibilities to fulfill, and live up to their titles. Collectively, they are employees under corporate, workers who are responsible to do their jobs as well as befit the executive level accordingly. But beyond this physical, common idea of responsibility is the more crucial moral responsibility. Adrift in space with limited resources, do we continue to use precious medicine on Curly? With only one working cryo chamber remaining, who should get to use it? Without any food left, is it right or okay to resort to cannibalism? These are difficult judgments to make, yet judgments that one has to make, especially of someone like Curly and later Jimmy, being the captain. Clear-cut roles and assignments to be done tie in with the trolley problem-esque decisions to be made, with each tangible tasking allowing a myriad of choices and outcomes. One needs to be careful to ensure they do not find themselves handling consequences. Now, it might not seem like it, but this parallels our daily lives rather well. Sure, you may not be in a life or death situation, stuck in a spaceship somewhere with only an endless supply of mouthwash, or at least I hope not, but every little decision makes a difference that you have to take responsibility for. If you chose not to study for an exam, well, you ought to be prepared to fail or do really badly. If you chose a job you don't like for really high pay, then you need to acknowledge this equivalent exchange that you've signed yourself up for. Even the smallest things like ordering food. If you end up not liking something, well, you made your choice. This is not to say that you're stuck forever in that situation. You could study hard next time and get your grades up, quit that job and find another, or order something else. You can absolutely make changes and improve on poor or non-optimal choices. However, these choices are irreversible in the sense that once they happened, well, they happened. You can't just delete them or remove them from existence. Man is condemned to be free. Condemned because he did not create himself. In other respect is free, because once thrown into the world, he is responsible for everything he does. That's right, it's time for more existentialism. Responsibility at its core is about making choices, but in extension to making that decision is bearing the weight that it carries. Curly and Jimmy are the exact opposites in this regard, with Curly as the responsible man in contrast with Jimmy, the epitome of irresponsibility. Just like how fish is made, beyond the immediate themes lies something more, and in this case both stems from the grounds of existentialism. On the surface, it might seem like Jimmy accepts the outcome of the terrible things he does, and hence can be said to be responsible on this basis. But upon closer examination, we see that he is not accepting them, but indifferent and in denial of the choices he makes. The absence of remorse, grief, or any kind of reaction really, towards the deaths of his fellow crewmates is a clear reflection of this total detachment from the consequences of his actions. He is only aware of the fact that something is happening, but not the gravity of the situation. On the contrary, Curly exhibits clear leadership capabilities as he takes care of the other members and all the affairs on the ship. Additionally, and more directly pertaining to the concept of existentialism, Curly's reflection on being at the top of his ladder, a desire for more with a tinge of regret in his career path, is a careful consideration of his purpose in life. Jimmy, on the other hand, fails to see the greater picture in constructing this purpose. His actions and decisions made are only independent events in of itself. As a result, he will always remain trapped, climbing the ladder, since there is not an end to that ladder defined, making choices to take steps, but steps that will never end. Responsibility allows for growth, with the choices made leading to an outcome which will then lead to more outcomes and so on, until you arrive at a destination. Jimmy's failure in taking any kind of responsibility in both the immediate choices made and actions taken, and in his own development and purpose, leaves him a meaningless existence, condemning him to his terrible fate. You can see this in the other characters as well. falling in between the two extremes that is Jimmy and Curly. They each have their own ladders to climb, things to do, titles, which ironically is Jimmy pointing out the importance of. They might not be successful at it, but it's clear that they have a distinct label to set them apart. Anya the nurse, Swansea the mechanic, Daisuke the intern, and Curly the captain. Jimmy the co-pilot, but we don't actually see him doing any piloting. In fact, he crashes the ship. And later on as the captain, well, we all know how that went. He has no title of his own. His cowardice leads him to avoid responsibility, and with no responsibility, he is worthy of no title. Our worst moments do not define us, but that's all he's got to define himself with. Compared to how Fish is made, Mouthwashing has a lot more to offer in terms of a concrete storyline, which I found more difficulty in deciphering the themes because of its increased complexity. I chose to focus on the existence interpretation of responsibility with a focus on Jimmy's character, but as humans are in real life, each one of them is far more complex to be defined by this singular metric. As always, it's important to try it out for yourself and find value in your own terms. Heck, I'm still uncertain on some things, like the choice of mouthwash as the object. What does that symbolize? And in the beginning of the game, I hope this hurts that shows up. What does that mean? There's just a lot of things, and I neither want to, nor do I have the time to be making one of those 2-hour long full analyses, so I'm just picking one thing that I want to cover. Anyways, 10 out of 10 game, go check it out. I think it's like $10 or something, maybe less in your currency. I think it's totally worth it.